So, we're finally here. We're finally at the part where I tell you the big thing, the big change that I've made to the Ranger in my reworked version of the Ranger, as I'm now calling it. Welcome to Intelligence 14 Wisdom 2, and this is part 4 of, well, it's hopefully part 4, the last of 4 of my series about the Ranger, about how I am trying to fix the Ranger class, with kind of as minimal changes as possible. You saw with my last 2 videos, I'm kind of just moving features around, at least particularly in the high levels, but now we're getting to the meat of the changes that I've had to make. And this video has been a long time coming, so let's get into it and not waste any more time. So what we're talking about is the damage output of the Ranger. And there are a couple things I want to talk about before we get into the changes I make. The first thing is, what should the damage output be? And secondly, what is the damage output? Actually, let's deal with the what is the damage output first. Okay, so this massive numbers you can see right here, this is a thing I've been working on for the past 6 months to try to figure out, what the answer to the question, what is the Ranger's damage output? And so I've calculated the average damage output of a lot of the martial classes. I'm missing most of the monk because that is a pain to work with, in terms of calculating probabilities and things like that, because they have so many abilities and they're also standoff keys. So anyways, I've gotten the fighter, the paladin, barbarians, rogues, and rangers, and so that's what I'm comparing them to. So let us try to scroll down over here. Take a look. So they're color coded. So green means it's above average, red means it's below average, and you can see this is the rangers that use the 2-weapon fighting style, and they're looking pretty good over at the beginning, but you can see as they get to higher levels, particularly at level 11, there is a decrease, significant decrease, and they just keep getting worse on average. All right, they're not losing damage output, but in comparison to the average of all of the subclasses, their damage output is going down. Now let's go down to dueling, and we see again dueling is just not that great. There's maybe a couple places where it's slightly above average, and it's just so bad. And let's go down and see the archery. It's just generally just super bad. So this would be definite proof of the Ranger. It's just horrible. Look at it. They're barely above average at any point in time. But that's because this isn't entirely accurate, or at least it's not as accurate as it should be. Because you see, let's just ignore this stuff at the bottom now. That was background work and for creating this video. But anyways, this is taking the average of various stuff. They're taking average of builds with archery, builds with dueling, or just one weapon, builds with 2-weapon fighting, and builds with great weapon fighting. And you'll notice great weapon fighting is very green. It's very above average, because great weapon fighting does more damage. And so when you're comparing, archery builds to great weapon fighting builds, archery builds naturally are going to be lower. So let's take a look at another spreadsheet I made to account for this. This is the great weapon fighting stuff, but you can see we've divided it by the style. So look at that. Before, great weapon fighting, all green. Now, some of them are red, some of them are green, some of them are just white. So this is comparing each of these numbers to the average for that level. So actually, it turns out Paladin, it's not that great. And then Storm Herald, particularly of the desert, but also the sea. As it turns out, the people say that Storm Herald is really bad. According to my calculations, it's really great, super great, 14,000 damage per day. But enough of that. I'll I might go into that in another video, but let's go to the Ranger and see how they compare. So look at that. We've this is just based on 2-weapon fighting builds, and it's not doing much better. It's actually really kind of slightly worse. And then the dueling, better than before, in terms of like comparison to average, but still not that great. And over here, the archery, which is it is most of the builds. Where's archery? There's archery. Again, better, like a lot better actually. Like some green over here, but at higher levels, there's something off. So there's graphs that I've made, and these might help us explain why this is. And you'll take my word. We're just going to look at one of the graphs, but you'll take my word for it. This thing that I'm about to show you about the Ranger happens with all of the classes. So, Gloomstalker. This is their curve. This is the highlighted. It goes up and then it kind of peaks at level 11. Colossus Slayer. Same thing. And so that's all the hunter subclasses, and then Gloomstalker, because those are the only ones that can use 2-weapon fighting. So anyways, you'll notice a thing, and that is the fact that they plateau around level 11, whereas the other classes, they increase in their damage. So this thing where there's actually two averages, there's one, the Ranger, which kind of peaks, and then the rest of the classes which increase in power. That is very significant. That's the problem with the Ranger. And some people said it online that the Ranger doesn't kind of peaks at levels 9 through 11. They're right. Here's the proof. Now I should mention one thing, and it's that this subclass doesn't. This calculation that I've done for the Ranger doesn't factor in spell slots and the damage that those do. Maybe later I will, do that and see how it works, but I think the plateauing is going to be very similar. But for now, this is what I have because calculating spells is extremely complicated for this kind of spreadsheet. So anyways, let's go back and discuss. Another thing we have to consider is how effective the Ranger should be. And the first thing is, it is a mixed class. It is a combat-focused class. It's also an exploration-focused class. And I'll talk about this when I make a video about balance, but basically, if it's focused on two things, it should be less powerful in each of them than a focused class on one of them. So a Ranger, which has two focuses, exploration and combat, should be less powerful than a fighter in combat. Fighter should be better at combat since they focus entirely on combat, or mostly entirely on combat. They get a couple bonuses to checks, ability checks. But anyways, for the most part, Ranger should be less powerful than the fighter because the fighter focuses more on combat than the Ranger does. The Ranger splits its focus. So the Ranger should be more powerful than the fighter and then the Barbarian. It should be kind of in line with the Rogue because they focus more like skills, which covers a broad area. So it shouldn't be more powerful. Like, Ranger should not be the most powerful class. Now, when it comes to favored enemy, that is an interesting point. And I think if you're fighting favored enemies on the power level of the most powerful classes, not above their power level, but like just slightly below them, I think. Because it's like a specific situation. You're fighting favored enemies, which brings in your exploration feature into combat, so you should be really effective against them. Not like super duper effective. Like, you should be able to say, I want to play a Battle Master, because they top the lists very easily. Be able to play Battle Master, be very powerful, or you can be a Ranger, specifically powerful against one person, and also generally powerful in combat and exploration. So, it shouldn't be the most powerful class. It should be a very powerful class when fighting favored enemies, and a decently powerful class when not fighting favored enemies. So, going off the data I have right now, the Ranger plateau. And in particular, it plateaus because there isn't really any scaling combat feature. And now, the reason why it plateaus is because there's no really scaling combat feature. Whereas barbarians get increasing amount of rages, paladins get more divine smites, and fighters get more action surge and more attacks. And also, the other subclasses do a better job of like scaling. Like Battlemaster is a great example. But the amount of dice they have and the size of the dice increases gradually across the level progression, giving a really nice, gradual increase. Whereas the ranger subclasses, you get your your special attacks, like the Horizon Walker. They can teleport between attacks, and if they hit two different people, they get 3 attacks. So if you're fighting multiple people, you can do more attacks. That's a bump at level 11, but you don't scale. It's just more attacks. Then you can do those same amount of attacks, and your attacks stay the same amount of power. So this is a thing that needs to be fixed. So I made some big changes to Favored Enemy. So this is the first level portion of the feature. And this one, nothing really much has changed from the Revised Ranger. Now, the Revised Ranger split it into 2. You had your Favored Enemy, then your Greater Favored Enemy. I like the concept. It doesn't make sense that a level 1 hero would have significant experience tracking, hunting, and fighting dragons. So, you don't. Instead, you can choose these kind of stuff that have low-level stuff. So beasts, fae, humanoids, monstrosities, and undead. And then that's one change. And the other change is that you add your Hunter's Ire dice to damage rolls, damage rolls from weapon attacks against your favorite enemy. I call it Hunter's Ire because I know it sounded cool. I didn't want to just say favorite enemy dice. That sounded very generic or something. But anyways, this is a dice that slowly progresses. There were different versions of this. That at some point it went up to like a 2d6 or something at the max. But right now, it is a d4 at level 1. It goes up to a d6 at level 8, and then it's a d8 at level 15. It decreases very gradually, but every attack you make can have that if you're attacking your favorite enemy. That is the level 1 stuff about favorite enemy that I changed. Now at level 6, you can choose another favorite enemy, and you get an additional benefit. You can add your wisdom modifier. You can use your action to add your wisdom modifier to your AC, potentially allowing the attack to miss you. And you can do this a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier. So you get better at avoiding their attacks. Not supremely good, but fairly decent, especially if your wisdom is good. And at level 12, you get a greater favorite enemy. And this is something that, as a 12th level character, you now have significant experience tracking these things. Dragons, aberrations, constructs, fiends, and things like that. So now your favorite enemy stuff applies to them, and also you get more benefits to your favorite enemy. You kind of have a legendary resistance to them, where if they force you to make a saving throw, you can choose to have advantage, and again, number of times equals to your wisdom modifier. So now you're better at avoiding their effects. This is downplayed from the Revised Ranger, which I think just had you have advantage on saving throws against them, or saving throws that are caused by them. And I thought that was too powerful. A permanent advantage on something, not like skill check, but saving throw. Permanent advantage on saving throw. I don't think is, and I don't think that's balanced. Even if it is, you only have it in specific situations, but you have it. But in those situations, it's a massive power. And I don't think that's the way we should do situational benefits. So anyways, that's level 12. Now, level 18, you can choose another greater favorite enemy or regular favorite enemy. But now you get your combat capstone, which I talked about in the last, or I hinted at in the last video, which is you score crits on a 19 or 20 against your favorite enemy. So, the thing is, you have your regular dice. Say it's a d8 for your archery. So you're doing a d8 plus. At this point, I think it's a d8. So you do your attacks do 2d8 plus your dex, and then now you can crit and do 4d8. So rangers have really great crits, and it makes sense. They're criticals, hits are finding a weak spot and doing massive damage because you're hitting the weak spot. And rangers are they track and study their enemies, find the weak spots, and the crits are very good against their weak spots. So that's the combat capstone of the ranger at level 18 instead of level 20. The level 20 capstone is something different, which I talked about again in the third video. Alright, so now that I've explained the features, let's take a look at how this affects the damage output of the ranger. So we're going to take a look at the graphs of the spreadsheet, not the numbers, because I think the graphs are a bit easier to understand. Alright, so this is the Gloomstalker, and then the Colossus Slayer, and such, and they are all in this sort of bottom half, which is it's not what we want. At low levels, they're right in the middle of the pack. But at high levels, they kind of drop off a little bit. Now, they are progressing, you'll notice. It's not like it just flat. They're progressing, albeit slowly, but this does seem to have an effect. Let's take a look at dueling. This is by far the most diverse in terms of damage output potentials. So Gloomstalker, I mean, it's better. It's like at the top of the pack in lower levels, but again, falling short. It seems to have again this sort of up and then leveling off. Now it's not as dramatic. It's like up and going and slowly leveling off. Like if you like math, this is a square root curve. It goes up and it keeps going. Which is better. We've made it a better curve, but we still don't like the shape of the curve. The curve is going up, and then it's not a line upwards with power spikes in here and there. It is a curve that slowly levels off at higher levels. Now, I did say, and we see this again with over here, I did say that this spreadsheet doesn't calculate for spells of the ranger, which I think might do that leveling off. But for now, I'm going with the data I have, which is that it doesn't seem to have much of an effect. This favored enemy, this favored enemy improvement with added dice and eventually an increased critical range. So why am I making a video about this on YouTube for everyone to see that my thing didn't work? Well, that's because this isn't my thing. All right, this is an approximation. This is a model of how the damage output would go, and I think this is actually less than what's actually gonna happen. So let's take a look at how this spreadsheet calculates the addition of the favored enemy damage output. So it is added as part of the base attack, which is modified by the chance to hit and things like that. But for the base attack, what we do is we take this favored enemy chance, which is the chance that the creature you're fighting is a favored enemy, multiply it by your Hunter's Ire dice, which is the average result, and then we add that to your base attack. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it, all right? Chance it's a favored enemy times average amount of dice. Now, there are 10 types of favored enemy, and I just assumed that each of them occupies an equal percentage of the monster population in your campaign. There are the ooze and the plant creature types, but there are so few monsters that it's not worth even considering them as favored enemy options. I took a look. There's just so little. I didn't want people accidentally shooting themselves in the foot by choosing that as their favorite enemy, and then meeting it like once or twice in the entire campaign. But this right here. We're assuming that it's 10% of the creatures that you face, and then it later goes to 20% when you get to your 6th level and a second favorite enemy, and such. So it's gradually increasing that chance that what you're fighting is your favorite enemy, which massively affects your damage output. Now, before we discuss if this is going to be, if this graph that I showed you is indicative of most campaigns that Rangers are going to find themselves in, let's take a look at a different spreadsheet that figures out what if everybody was your favorite enemy. what's your damage output then? So, this is that spreadsheet, and there is a big difference. Look at that. Gloomstalker is one of the most powerful subclasses. Eventually, it's beaten by, I think it's a Colossus Slayer at a couple levels, and then Battlemaster at a couple levels. But it is like consistently the second most powerful subclass in D&D, which is not what we were going for. I told you back in the beginning, Rangers who are fighting their favorite enemy should be a little bit lower, or maybe at least, or maybe on par with, the lower than or on par with most powerful classes when they're fighting just their favorite enemies. And here, again, we haven't calculated spells, so Gloomstalker using spells is going to be more powerful than Battlemaster, by far. Which is not what we want, alright? The person who has studied the art of war for years, put their entire existence into the art of war, except for 2 semesters of pottery, because you have to fill out those electives, should not be beaten by some guy who just jumped out of the shadows and said, boo! Now, let's go over to the dueling, and again, see what's up over here. So again, Gloomstalker, very powerful. Horizon Walker, even more powerful, especially at the higher levels. But I want you to notice something here. The subclasses are actually pretty balanced at higher levels. Now, Horizon Walker is superior than Battlemaster, especially when you're including spells. This isn't the most powerful Battlemaster subclass. So I think it's okay. I need to take a look at those 2 specific rows in the spreadsheet. But anyways, the Ranger is great in this stuff. But the Ranger is, aside from the Horizon Walker, there might be problems with it, but for the most part, the Ranger is fairly balanced at higher levels, at level 11 and above. But they have this massive jump at like 8th and 10th level. And they have this jump over here. They are the most powerful class if they have 100%, if they are fighting, everything they're fighting is their favorite enemy at lower levels. So, the way to balance this is to make sure that the Ranger never is not in a situation where it fights 100% of its favorite enemies at lower levels. Or it fights 100% of what it fights is its favorite enemy at lower levels. I know, I just said the same thing, but with the word switched around, but English is very specific. So anyways, how do we make sure so that this doesn't happen? The Ranger is not the most powerful, because we don't want it to be the most powerful. So what do? Well, first of all, this is assuming 100% of your enemies are your favorite enemy. This is actually a time where the greater favorite enemy is actually really good, and it just kind of happened by accident. But the greater favorite enemy, which in my version of the Ranger, comes at level 12 when it's balanced. If you're playing in a campaign where the focus is on a specific type, like the Rise of Tiamat saga, or is it Horda? Whatever is it Tyranny of Dragons? I think that's it. The Dragon Adventures. You get favorite enemy being dragons at level 12. Storm King's Thunder, giants at level 12. Curse of Strahd, you can get undead at level 1, so that might be an issue. But Princes of the Apocalypse, elementals at level 12. It's kind of a reward for sticking with this adventures for so long. Now I can fight these elementals much better than anybody, which is great. That is pretty cool. So if you're playing a focus campaign like that, then Greater Fated Fraternity really reduces the possibility of you getting like this until the higher levels when it's balanced. But there's another elephant in the room that we really need to talk about, and that is humanoids. So to help my point, let's consider what are the staple monsters that you fight at low levels. I think there's bandits, there's goblins, and their cousins, the bugbears and such, orcs, cultists, and then undead, like zombies and skeletons. I mean, rats as well, but that's like a first level specific kind of thing. But anyways, how many of those are humanoid creatures? 4 out of 5. So even if your DM is doing this thing where it's not a goblin adventure for the next 5 levels, they're doing like, oh, I'm gonna throw out bandits and orcs and goblins and let's some cultists in there as well and undead. And the ranger's gonna be like, I'm better than everybody in most of those encounters. This is not what we want. We do not want the ranger to outshine everybody at low levels. We want it to feel powerful at low levels, sure. All right, this is one of the newbie classes. People say, "Oh, ranger, I've heard of those. I want to play one." So we need to fix humanoid specifically because I think that is the only problem. Because there aren't beast-focused campaigns. There aren't monstrosity-focused campaigns. Well, what I do in my game, it's one of the many options you have, is you can reclassify people. So I have goblinoids and orcs be part, and also dwarves, but, going back to the staples, the goblinoids and the orcs are part of this separate group called Manunians, the Stone Children. So you can be really good against goblinoids, but your favorite enemies are not bandits and cultists. I also have elves or fae, just kind of more segmentation. Or what you could do is you could have your favorite enemy do I think it's either in the player's handbook or the revisor. Maybe it's both, but where you can pick two types of humanoids, orcs and humans. And those two, they are your favorite enemy. That might work. You can be good at orcs and bugbears, but hobgoblins and goblins and humans you're not good at. Or if you do humans, maybe there are some elvish cultists and dwarvish cultists because those are also races in D&D that I kind of feel it's sort of glossed over how much the cultists are elves and dwarves and things. But anyways, I'm still debating whether I want to do my version where I segment the races specifically, or it's just the way we've had it in D&D for a while, where you can pick two races of humanoids. I think that's the only real problem with this favorite enemy feature that I've made. And since it solves a lot of the problems that the ranger had, plateauing in terms of damage output, Hunter's Mark being mandatory, favorite enemy not feeling useful, I think this is the fix that the ranger needs. But, I could be wrong, so go ahead and playtest this. Test it out in your ordinary games, and, come back and tell me how it went. I'll leave a link for the full revision down in the description. It's a Google Doc, and at some point I will come back and revise it as you have to do with stuff, but for the time being, this is the Ranger reworked.